So our next speaker is Aude Oliva. She's a research scientist at the CCL Lab at MIT, and she's the MIT director of the Watson AI Lab and co-director of the MIT Quest for Intelligence. She publishes really remarkably cross-disciplinary research, spanning both human perception and cognition and computer vision and cognitive neuroscience. And she recently came to CMU to give a talk. And I remember after it was over, we all walked out a bit shocked at the breadth of challenges that she had set out, not only for herself, but for all of us that aim to follow in her footsteps. So everyone, please welcome Aude Oliva.
So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, wherever you are in the world. And I want to thank the organizer for giving me the chance to talk with you, to give you this presentation, and later looking forward to the panel and the question. So I would like to tell you today about some of the cognitive insight that I've learned over the years of research I've been doing in my group, focusing on a model of visual activity and event recognition. So how can we build a system, artificial system, that recognize the visual world? So I'm sharing with you here milestone from place recognition activity classification model to eventually common sense like reasoning, which are broadly inspired by cognitive science. So we design in the lab those milestones based on decades of research that were done in the field of cognitive psychology and cognitive development. And they're very broad on that slide. And today I will come into some few details regarding some of those milestones. So I believe that the cognitive state of the human mind, the milestones that need to be achieved during learning to move the cognitive capabilities to the next step, even if it's for an artificial system. Those insights can give a lot of insight to computer scientists to build a better model, also model that can interact with us, or model we can understand why they are going to give a particular response. So in this roadmap, so we start with a robust representation of the visual scene, the sound with them if you're in a multimodal, so context, scene, object, events, that used to be called the gist of the scene, still called that way, but models of computer vision have started moving along forward, and a lot of the models out there are able to categorize and recognize scene and object. And so this backbone of knowing the context is necessary to build robust abstract representation of the world. For instance, in the abstract representation here that I call separate, the activity of cutting a tree or piece of paper are both instances of the higher abstract category separate. And I believe that in order to move forward through those milestones described here, we need at each previous step a very strong backbone, what I call a backbone model. And as was Elizabeth just saying, having strong model of the sensory process, just the analysis of the image or the sound, and those sort of list telling you the main things going on, I think is very important before moving up to model that will start having some abilities related to analogy, causality, and so on. So I also want to note here that the computational approach that you will use, supervised, unsupervised, discriminative approach, generative approach, is independent of the milestone or the task you want to perform. I think as a field, we will see which model might be more appropriate in order to achieve a milestone, or how to combine different approach. But I would like this presentation to be agnostic to the approach. I'm going to describe the work we do. I'm a big fan of supervised learning and big data. First, because I believe that you have to teach a system or kids what to do. Eventually, weekly supervised learning might be the answer, but everything I showed today is hardcore supervised learning. And upon birth, the human brain is this huge, massive network of neurons and connections that are very hungry to receive sensory data and build up representation. And the human brain starts by learning on, based on a lot of data. So something else is the mechanism, a model you will choose to use to achieve some performances in abstraction and recognition. I don't believe they have to be linked necessarily to the mechanistic or the mechanism people use. As long as the model produce representation, output similarity between the representation or the input and output you give it, that we can understand. And I think that AI eventually will be able to build systems that can achieve a sort of common sense-like reasoning. We don't know when, far in the future, and communicate with humans in ways we can understand. And I'm a big fan of the human brain and cognitive development and cognitive science. And sometimes I use it and sometimes I don't, because as I think really the way two systems can communicate is what we are after here. So given all this, let's start with a precise topic, which is activity classification. So I'm a fan of big data because the brain capture and record a lot of data. And when it comes to exploring the world as any age, we are faced with dynamic events. Therefore, dynamic events, video, if you have a system, is sort of the backbone input, the most important input in the visual system that can be given to a system. So one of the questions in cognitive science is, what is an event? How long is an event? How do you segment an event? An event can be very long, can be minutes and hours. Or so there's a very interesting work in cognitive science out there about how the human brain or cognitive system represent event. And here for this computer model, I'm going to show that is part of the moment in time project. We started with a very simple idea that if you look at the world and if you have a video that you cut into events, most of the meaningful events in the world that make sense to us, we are going to say, oh, an object is falling, somebody is talking or running and so on, unfold within a few seconds. Let's say 3 seconds. So when you open your laptop, you click on something, you pick up an object. A lot of those events, because you're actively interacting with things in the world, you're moving, it takes some time, it takes a few seconds. And so 3 seconds was actually this simple idea that we used in order to segment and conceive what we call event into our model. And it corresponds roughly to the average human working memory to hold and identify meaningful transformation and changes that occur in the world between people, object and people, or even a natural phenomenon. So if you take a long video and you cut it in random segment of 3 seconds, you have a very high chance to actually have segments that have a meaningful interpretation to people looking at it. So in the moment data set, with 1 million video, each with a label, all the cuts started by being selected at random on a large video, really a lot of video out there. And then they were labeled in crowdsourcing experiments, which give a lot of diversity to the data set. As you can see under carrying or breaking or brushing, pushing, they are very different type of video. And if an action take more than 3 seconds, well, actually 3 seconds is still enough to capture most of what's going on, have a meaningful interpretation of this action. And if it's less than 3 seconds, it's a win-win situation, because then you will have this action that has been labeled by people within the temporal context of what may happen right before or right after, and having information on this temporal context and sequence is going to be very important for future model of causality. Importantly, for computer vision, our main hypothesis was that the features that will be learned from the deep learning model from those 3 second segments would be robust and sufficient for action recognition tasks. And indeed, that's what we found. So we observed that different deep learning models show strong transfer performances across action recognition dataset. You have a table on the slide with results from 2 large-scale benchmarks, moment in time as well as kinetics, and results were in par with each other. And you can find the details about the model in the PayMe article, and the website has actually all the model and the data set if you want to download. And so here are some test video that were shown to one of the model using the class activation mapping or CAM method in computer vision, which shows in red the region in the video that are the most related to the output label. And if you spend a moment focusing on a video, you can see that the output label may change over time. So with this very simple model, deep learning approach, it was able to capture some of the activities as well as have a weak localization of where those things may happen. So that was a step 1. So now something that we do naturally is 3 seconds is actually pretty long, and when we observe the world, first we are able to capture several meaningful events at first, in the first glance, and then we move our attention around, and there are many things that may happen, both that follow over time or that happen at the same time in space. So multiple recognition is what humans do. So an easy next step for just a backbone perceptual model was now to take into account several labels for each initial video. So the moment data set was enhanced with additional label. And here you have example of the various type of activities and events that can be related either over time or within the same space where different things are happening within the same space. And so the new data set that is also available for download is over 2 million label, 800,000 video for the training, over 300 action category. And here are some example on the 1 million data set. So we also just released a new archive paper that actually describe how to train video model with multiple labels, various examples, and you can also download the models. And we observe an expected larger jump on performances with now a top 5 accuracy over 80%. And this is actually important in order to move forward to the next step of what I call more cognitive level AI, to have a strong backbone of perception model. In that case, the focus one was on activity recognition. All right, so we have a model. You can also use kinetics. There are out there excellent backbone model of video recognition. So take the one that fits the type of approach you're using, and what can we do with this? Or before, actually, let me show you example. So those are actually example of the multi-label model that shows weak localization of where some of the action are happening. We do observe, refer you to the paper, the emergence of units in the deep learning model that are more specific to some of the category. All right, so we have a backbone. What can we do with that? So I believe that now is the time for the field of computer vision and computer science to actually really work and attack higher level questions and performances that a human and other animal can do that are more in the cognitive domain. Because we are arriving at a stage where those sensory models start being pretty good. There's no reasoning in it. But they could like look alike what the visual brain in V1 and the inferotemporal cortex may do. So next step, what about abstraction? Can we build from raw video, raw input, pixel, optical flow, raw video, a framework which will identify that different video pertain to the same abstract category, which is a cognitive milestone when kids start to be able to do those abstractions. So in this new work that will be put on archive shortly, our goal is to recognize what we call set abstraction. Predict the relational abstraction for a set of video, or the similarities among a set of video and event. But a similarity that goes beyond the visual information and the pixel themselves. So here in the 4 top video, a possible abstraction interpretation of those 4 video is competing. The abstraction that we will form when we look at different events happening together or in different moments in time depends on the numbers of events you see, or when you're learning, the number of events you're learning together. And in that case, concretely, the number of video we put in that we call the set. So if you only consider the 2 first videos, swimming and biking, then you could say, well, the abstraction exercising fits. But if you add the other video, the abstraction change. So we do need this in our model. We give it a set of video, different numbers, and the model is supposed to tell us the right abstraction. Okay, he has to learn the abstraction as we are teaching kids to learn about abstraction and semantic concept in the world. So what can we do if we have a model that is able to tag from the raw video some abstraction level of the activity? So in this work, we are proposing 2 tasks that require a model, a backbone model of abstraction in order to even be conceived or even to be trained. So they require the abstraction. So the first task is what we call a set completion task. Is given a set of video, which video from a queries will fit the set to complete the set, which is having a similar abstraction level. The second task, the odd one out detection, is which video doesn't fit a set. You could say it might be ambiguous in this case. Some people will select the game, and some other will select the game because the others have animal, for instance. And if I add a new video, the level of abstraction change. And so for a human, the number of dimension that we can use is actually very rich, and it is needed to understand all those dimensions that we can use in order to put things together. In this model that I'm showing, we focus on event and action, falling, playing, competing, and so on. So the framework that's called the set abstraction framework combine the visual features as input with natural language supervision to generate high-level representation of similarities. So here, the key is to use language. Language embeddings, the use of semantic embeddings, caption, there are various ways. And the model is trained to simultaneously approximate the semantic language-based representation of the abstraction and predict the class. So we do need language, at least in this approach, in order to glue and have the model learning that those very disparate visual input actually have something in common. So to go beyond the sensory process that you could do with those input. So for instance, if a model has learned that exercising can take many forms, the feature representation can be used then to select which new event is also exercising or which event doesn't fit within the exemplar, which has the two of a task. So here are examples found by the set abstraction framework to recognize commonalities among sets. So that's like the backbone abstraction. So the crying and writing were actually put together under communicate, the climbing and landing under descent and so on. And I have to say that I would have not thought about some of them. Of course, it depends on how you structure the semantic embedding to teach the model those. But here's a proof of concept that some things that make sense can actually be produced by the framework. And here are example with the focus of attention, which is also an output of the framework that put together very disparate video, but indicating reds where the model, the model literally focus in order to put this video into the bag of propel or transfer and put them together. So the next task is the set completion task, which is given a set of reference video, select the query, the model that fits the best the reference set. You could almost see that as a game that people could play with themselves, with other people, or with this model or a better model. And in this case, the query video suggests that the sleeping is the closest to the reference set. And here's one of the table. The rank correlation is used in comparison to human ranking, human doing the very similar task, in order to see to which extent, using different model as well as those two large data sets, the frameworks is able to find out which one can complete a set. And in a similar vein, the other task, the complementary task, is detecting the event that doesn't fit or fit the less, and in that case, those are detection accuracy, with also here some real example from the testing set. Again, on multi-moment in time or kinetics data set. Very good to always replicate with various data sets. So I gave you a quick tour of some of the work that we are doing, and the most recent paper will be put on archive shortly. Now what comes next? Well, I think that if we have an excellent backbone of perception and a good backbone of abstraction, we are not there yet. That is a proposal, and I know there are a lot of very elegant work out there using other approach that look at the notion of abstraction. Our needed milestone in the model architecture in order to think about analogy, causality, intention. It's like a big box. It has a lot of things inside. I even do not know how to attack it next. But I'm going to give you a few insights. And importantly, models that are scalable and always are starting from the sensory raw input. And I put a timestamp of 5 years. We'll see. Maybe something will start emerging with model that could play those sort of card game I'll show you, but with more analogy or better way to understand various events in the world. So that is my analogy slide. It's very coarse, but the basic idea is describing something by comparing it to something else. And most of the time when you're using analogy or you're teaching your kids about analogy, it's actually to explain something in simpler terms. So I really like this idea that at some point, maybe some of the system may, that right now, particularly using captioning and language, they want to add more words, to add more and more information at some point. It's going to be needed in the data bank of those models, but analogy is going to require a level of abstraction and simplification that will be, I think, very exciting for the field to look at. We need language there, absolutely. It's vision and language together. And working on analogy will be a new world for cognitive level artificial intelligence model that will need to integrate the features, the language, the relational graph, abstract concept, and memory. It's an entirely new space of evolution for model. And I find very exciting that a lot of work out there start scratching the surface because we could make as a field, all of us, really fast and exciting progress. So what else? Well, there's something very important that should be absolutely everywhere, and that is not. It's kind of very difficult to do in those deep learning approach right now, is, well, the human brain everywhere has memory embedded. So you can call your own memory or memory of the world. It's called knowledge. Those are both memory. Human are memory bank. Our entire brain is a storage bank. Very high capacity of storage. And one very important feature of human memory encoding is that when an event comes in, there's data on the human brain on this. It is compressed, distorted, remember or not, in different ways. So we can try to look for the rules or the guidelines that a certain type of event is going to be super compressed and forgotten, or actually is even not to be compressed. It's going to be enhanced by additional details. So the human brain is doing all those transformations. And one of the ground question in neuroscience is, what does it do to a representation? Why some are going into memory, some are enhanced, and so on. And I believe that memorability, which I'm going to present to you in a minute, is a measure of the utility of information in a system, is a property of the visual or auditory input that impact every single process and representation in the human brain, and so it should in the models. So memorability, so in my group, we have been working on this for over a decade, on what makes visual information memorable or forgettable. It's actually a gradient, more or less. And amassing actually neuroscience and mostly behavioral data about what makes something to be remembered by a group of people. And we came up after a lot of study to the conclusion that visual memorability is a consequence of the optimization required for visual processing. This suggests that memorability and memory could be embedded in the fabric of every single unit in your network, either during learning or as an ad hoc. I don't know. I'll let your imagination go. So memorability also allows to focus on what is important. And whenever we look at the world or we are learning about the world, there is this importance coming in. And most of the time we call it, it's driven by attention. But if it's also driven by memory, then you will have memory driving focus of attention. And those are new explore avenue for computer science as well. And just as a quick snapshot, we do have a work that we will put on archive also shortly on memorable event, a model that learned from visual and verbal inputs to predict human memory score, and for the first time, memory decay. Because we need to start having an idea of if an event is being forgotten fast or less fast or not forgotten, what kind of compression is happening in the human mind or the cognitive system that can be replicated into a model, because that will give a hit on what the unit needs to really conserve when they are learning about the visual world. And finally, we started working with language embedding in my lab, and there's never enough data set out there of language. I'm a big fan of data sets. So we are going to release shortly Spoken Moment, which is the third version of Story of Moment for video that has over 500,000 3-second video with audio description, real audio description. And this will be actually presented at ECCV workshop. So I'm going to end this presentation with a snapshot of one of the web page on my website, which has a repository of our data set or model, as well as the neuroscience data, the behavioral data for eye movement, attention, memory, and we will add shortly the work I presented to you today. Okay, I'm going to stop here and take maybe a couple of questions.
Okay, great. I have a question myself, actually, about the event set abstraction. So those set abstractions seem to require very high level, they require us to make very high level connections across videos. For example, to see the swimming and basketball have competition in common, you have to really understand what's going on. And I would think that humans doing that kind of task are really looking at other humans in the images and figuring out their poses. And it's quite different from the current state of the art, I think, in action recognition, where we have these monolithic architectures that just output answers. So do you think that the way the future might be to factorize the problem, or is the monolith approach the right way?
It's an excellent question, and it is also a caveat of this first model. In order to make things work, we focus on event, and we tell people, think about the event, think of what's happening to the panda or the game, or like the event as a word or a few activity description. However, we do see when people do the task of organizing which video fits the most the set, that they are using a lot of other information. So first, you could have better backbone that can do multi-recognition, and those exist. So instead of only giving you jumping or falling, they will give you the other information of the object, as well the relation between them. And there's a lot of work that can be done here. But there is also the notion that when we look at an event, we have a sort of semantic embedding. Then if we speak, that semantic embedding will be transformed into words and caption. And here I would relay on having stronger work, more work that can take into account this multiplicity of things people may think of, relay, including memory. And then there'll be something that could be pretty interesting. There are years and years of work, even with those tasks and those models. If they could be learned, it would be fabulous if this would be learned in unsupervised or weakly supervised manner, by the way.
Okay, I think we have time for one more. So there's a quick question in the chat. Does the event abstraction task involve zero-shot learning, where you have unseen actions at test time?
Excellent question. I did not show the result for this, but this was actually one of the original motivations, certainly by the computer vision student and people working with us, is it would be a way to do a low shot or even a zero shot learning, because even a few video is coming in, then, you know, you might not know its class, but if you go in the semantic embedding, you can actually tag potentially an abstraction, which might be better than an error. And you will think that that's what kids do. You know, they go for the first time to the zoo and they will see a tiger and say it's a cat. So they are going to transpose what they said. This is a raw animal. So they're going to transpose information that is not necessarily linked to, so most often how they look like, but also could be linked to what they don't look like. So I hope that people, if not ourselves, will follow up to see how building abstraction representation might be really helpful for low shot learning. That'll be a good way.